Brother stole my college fund, then demanded to live with me after he ruined his life and expected me to forgive him. My name is Jessica, and I am 28 years old. My older brother, George, is 32. Growing up, it was clear my parents favored George. He could do no wrong in their eyes, while I always felt like I was under a microscope, constantly being judged. It was exhausting. George was the classic golden child, handsome, charming, and he knew it. He used his charm to get out of everything from chores to actual consequences for his actions. Me, I was just Jessica. The responsible one. The one who always got good grades. The one who worked part-time jobs since I was 16. The one who tried to make my parents proud, even though it never seemed to be enough. George, on the other hand, never had to lift a finger. Seriously, if he even hinted at wanting something, our parents would jump to get it for him. New video game? Done. Expensive sneakers? Already ordered. Car? Of course, what color would he like? Meanwhile, I was saving every birthday and Christmas check, working weekends at the local diner, just trying to build up my college fund. Did I mention that? My college fund. Here is the thing about George. He was not just spoiled, he was incredibly entitled. He genuinely believed the world owed him something. And he was lazy, like spectacularly lazy. He skated through high school, barely graduating because, well, why try when everything was just handed to you? College, forget about it. He went for about a semester, maybe two, I honestly cannot remember, before dropping out because it was too hard. Too hard. Imagine. So after dropping out, he bounced from job to job, usually getting fired for being late, not showing up, or just generally not doing any work. Our parents, of course, would bail him out every time. They paid his rent, gave him money for food, even bought him a new car after he wrecked his first one because he was texting and driving. Seriously. No consequences ever. Now you are probably thinking, wow, that is unfair. And you would be right. It was incredibly unfair, and it bred resentment in me for sure. But more than resentment, it fueled a kind of quiet determination. I decided early on that I was not going to rely on anyone but myself. I was going to work hard, save my money, and make my own way in the world. I was not going to be like George, expecting everything to be handed to me. And I was doing it. I got into a good college, on scholarships and with my own savings. I worked part-time during college, kept my grades up, and graduated with honors. I landed a decent job right out of school, and I have been working my way up ever since. I am not rich by any means, but I am comfortable. I have my own apartment, I can pay my bills, and I am actually starting to save again. It feels good. But let's get back to George, because this is where the real story starts. Remember my college fund? The one I had been diligently building since I was a little kid. Well, when I was in high school, maybe 16 or 17, I found out it was gone. Just gone. I asked my mom about it casually, just checking in. And she got all flustered and weird. She mumbled something about needing to use it for family expenses and that they would put it back. They would put it back. Sure they would. I pressed her because something felt off. And eventually, the truth came out. George had gotten into some trouble. Gambling debts, I think it was. Or maybe it was something else. Honestly, with George, it could have been anything. Anyway, he had gotten himself into a financial hole, and instead of facing the consequences, or even telling our parents himself, he had somehow convinced them to raid my college fund to bail him out. My college fund, the money I had worked so hard for, the money that was supposed to be my ticket to a better future. Gone. To cover George's mistakes, I was furious, absolutely livid. I confronted George, of course. I remember yelling at him, asking him how he could do that. He just shrugged, gave me that smarmy little grin of his, and said something like, "Well, you are smart, you will figure it out." I was speechless. He stole my future and acted like it was no big deal. No apology, no remorse, nothing, just that infuriating smirk. Our parents, they were apologetic, sort of. They promised to pay me back eventually. They said they were just trying to help George, that he was going through a tough time. A tough time. He stole my money, but you know what? I knew arguing was pointless. They would always take George's side. Always. So I did what I always did. I picked myself up, dusted myself off, and figured it out. I worked even harder, applied for more scholarships, and took out student loans. I made it work, but I never forgot. Never forgot George's smug face, never forgot my parents' excuses, and never forgot the feeling of betrayal. It burned inside me, a slow, simmering resentment that just kept growing over the years. Fast forward to now. Years have passed. George is still George, bouncing from job to job, living off our parents, making bad decisions, and generally being a drain on everyone around him. I, on the other hand, have built a life for myself, a life that is independent of my family and especially independent of George. I keep in touch with my parents, mostly out of obligation, but I have kept George at arm's length. I see him at family gatherings, birthdays, holidays, that kind of thing, but I avoid him as much as possible. He still tries to charm me, still tries to act like we are best buddies, but I see right through him. I know exactly what he is. And then a few weeks ago I got a call from my mother. She sounded stressed, more stressed than usual anyway. She started talking about George, of course. Apparently he had really messed up this time, like really messed up. She was being vague, but I could tell it was bad. Really bad. I asked her what happened, trying to sound concerned, even though, to be honest, a part of me was actually curious to see what George had done this time to finally land himself in hot water. My mother sighed, a long, dramatic sigh, and then she started to spill the beans. It turns out George had gotten involved in some kind of scam. Some get-rich-quick scheme, I guess. Apparently, he had borrowed a lot of money from some not-so-nice people, promising them huge returns, and then, surprise, surprise, the scheme collapsed. And now these not-so-nice people were after him. They were threatening him, harassing him, and basically making his life a living hell. And get this, our parents had finally had enough. For years, they had bylaid George out, covered for him, made excuses for him. But this time, they were drawing a line. They told him they were not going to help him. They were not going to pay off his debts, they were not going to give him any more money, and they were not going to let him move back home. They were done. Finally, after all these years, they were finally done enabling George's behavior. I almost could not believe it. My mother was practically weeping on the phone. She was saying how worried she was about George, how she did not know what he was going to do, how he had nowhere to go. And then she said it, the thing that made my jaw drop. She asked if George could come stay with me. Stay with me? Are you kidding me? After everything. After he stole my college fund. After years of being a selfish, entitled jerk. She actually thought I would just open my doors to him. I was stunned, absolutely stunned. I must have been silent for a few seconds, because my mother started to ramble, trying to convince me. She said it would just be temporary, just until he got back on his feet. She said he had nowhere else to go and that family should stick together. Family should stick together. That is rich, coming from the people who always put George first, who let him steal from me, who never held him accountable for anything. I finally found my voice, and I said very calmly, very clearly, no. Absolutely not. George is not moving in with me. My mother was shocked. She actually sounded offended. She started to argue, to plead, to guilt-trip me. She said I was being selfish, that I was being heartless, that I was turning my back on my own brother. I let her talk for a while, just listening, letting her get it all out. And then, when she finally paused for breath, I spoke again. I reminded her about the college fund. I reminded her about all the times George had taken advantage of me, of our parents, of everyone around him. I reminded her about his laziness, his entitlement, his complete lack of responsibility. And I told her point blank that I was not going to enable him anymore. I was not going to be his safety net. I was not going to let him disrupt my life. I said, Mom, I have worked hard for everything I have. I have built a good life for myself. And I am not going to let George come in here and ruin it. He made his bed, now he can lie in it. There was silence on the other end of the phone, a long, heavy silence. I could practically hear my mother's brain short-circuiting. I think she honestly believed that I would just automatically say yes, that I would always be the good, responsible daughter who cleaned up everyone else's messes. She was wrong. So wrong. Finally, she spoke, her voice tight and strained. "Fine, Jessica," she said. "If that is how you feel." And then she hung up, just like that. No goodbye, no I love you, nothing, just hung up. I stared at my phone for a moment, a little surprised but also relieved. It was done. I had finally stood up for myself, finally said no, and it felt good, really good. I did not hear from my parents for a few days after that, which was fine by me. I needed a break from the family drama anyway. I went to work, I went to the gym, I hung out with my friends, and I just enjoyed my peaceful, George-free life. It was bliss. Then, about a week later, I got a text from an unknown number. "Hey Jessica," it read, "it's George. Can we talk?" I almost deleted the text immediately. I really did not want to talk to George, but curiosity got the better of me. I replied, "What do you want?" He texted back immediately, "Can I come over? I really need to talk to you in person." I hesitated for a moment. Part of me wanted to just ignore him, to shut him out completely. But another part of me, maybe the part of me that still had a tiny sliver of hope that George could actually change, or maybe just plain morbid curiosity, made me say, "Fine." But just for a few minutes. He texted back, "Thanks, I will be there in an hour." An hour later there was a knock on my door. I opened it and there was George. He looked rough, really rough. He had not shaved in days, his clothes were wrinkled, and he just looked generally disheveled. He also looked scared, actually scared. I had never seen George scared before. It was interesting. I let him in and he slumped onto my couch like a deflated balloon. He looked around my apartment, taking it all in. My clean, organized living room, my bookshelf filled with books, my little balcony with plants. It was a far cry from the chaos I imagined he was currently living in. He sighed heavily and said, "Thanks for seeing me, Jessica. I know you probably hate me." I just looked at him, not saying anything, letting him squirm. He continued, "Mom told me you said I could not stay with you. I get it. I messed up, big time." He actually sounded almost sincere. Almost. I still was not convinced. I crossed my arms and said, You stole my college fund, George. Do you really think I would just forget about that?" He flinched like I had slapped him. He looked down at his hands and said, I know I messed up. I was young and stupid, and I was in trouble. I did not know what else to do. Young and stupid. He was like 20 years old when he stole my money. That is not exactly a child. And he was still using the same tired excuses. I rolled my eyes. "Spare me the sob story, George," I said. "What do you really want?" He looked up at me, his eyes pleading. "I need help, Jessica," he said. "I am in serious trouble. Those guys, they are not playing around. They are threatening too well, they are threatening me. And I do not know what to do. Mom and Dad won't help me, they cut me off. And I have nowhere else to go." He paused, looking at me with those puppy dog eyes he used to use to get everything he wanted from our parents. And then he said it. The thing I knew was coming. "Can I please stay here, just for a little while, until I figure things out? I promise I will not be any trouble. I will stay out of your way, I will even pay rent. Just please, Jessica, please help me." He was begging me. George, the golden child, was actually begging me for help. It was almost pathetic. And a tiny, tiny part of me, the part of me that still remembered that he was my brother, felt a flicker of sympathy. Almost. But then I remembered the college fund. I remembered his smirk. I remembered all the years of his entitlement and selfishness, and the sympathy vanished. Replaced by something else, something cold, something calculating. I leaned back on my couch, considering his request. I pretended to think about it, letting him sweat for a few moments. He was watching me, his eyes wide with desperation. Finally, I spoke. "Okay, George," I said, "you can stay here." His face lit up. "Really?" he said, his voice full of hope. "Really? Oh, thank you, Jessica, thank you so much. You are a lifesaver. I promise I will pay you back. I promise I will be no trouble. You will not even know I am here." I held up my hand, cutting him off. "Hold on, George," I said. "I am not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. You can stay here, but there are conditions." "Conditions?" He looked confused. "What kind of conditions?" I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile, the kind of smile that probably made his blood run cold. "Well, first of all," I said, "you are going to follow my rules. My rules, George, not Mom and Dad's rules. Mine and my rules are a little different." He swallowed hard. "Okay," he said. "What are your rules?" "Rule number 1," I said, "you are going to do everything I say. Everything. No questions asked. No arguments. You do exactly what I tell you to do when I tell you to do it." "Got it," he nodded quickly. "Got it," he said. "Anything." "Rule number 2," I continued, "you are going to work for me. You are going to earn your keep. You are not going to sit around here doing nothing, mooching off me like you always mooched off Mom and Dad. You are going to work, and I will decide what work you do. Understood?" He nodded again, a little less enthusiastically this time. "Understood," he mumbled. "Work." "Okay. Rule number 3," I said, "and this is the most important one. You are going to pay me back. For everything. Not just the college fund, but for everything. For all the years of being a selfish, entitled jerk. For all the trouble you have caused. For all the stress you have put me and Mom and Dad through. You are going to pay me back, George, in full, with interest." He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. "Pay you back, but how? I do not have any money. That is why I am in this mess in the first place." I shrugged. "Not my problem," I said. "You will figure it out. That is part of the deal. You want to stay here, you play by my rules. And my rules are non-negotiable. Do we have a deal, George?" He hesitated for a long moment. He looked around my apartment again, then back at me. He looked at my face, and I think he finally realized that I was serious, deadly serious. This was not Mom and Dad anymore. This was me, and I was not going to be taken advantage of, not anymore. "Okay," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "Deal." "Excellent," I said, standing up. "Welcome to your new home, George. Now let's get started. I have a few things I need you to do right away." And just like that, George moved in, and my plan began. My plan for revenge. It had been brewing for years, ever since he stole my college fund. And now, finally, I had the perfect opportunity to put it into action. The first few days were interesting. George was surprisingly compliant. He did everything I told him to do without complaint. He cleaned my apartment, did my laundry, ran errands for me, even cooked dinner. It was like having a personal assistant. A very pathetic, very scared personal assistant. I made him work hard, of course. I was not going to let him off easy. I had him scrubbing floors, cleaning toilets, doing all the chores I usually hated doing myself. And he did it all without a word of protest. He was clearly desperate to stay on my good side, or, more accurately, to avoid my bad side. I also started to dig into his situation. I wanted to know exactly what he had gotten himself into and who these people were who were after him. He was reluctant to talk about it at first, but I pressed him, reminding him of our deal. Eventually, he caved and told me everything. It was even worse than I had imagined. He had borrowed money from some really dangerous people, loan sharks, basically. He had promised them a huge return on their investment in some cryptocurrency scheme that was, of course, completely bogus. And now the loan sharks wanted their money back, with interest, and they were not going to take no for an answer. George was terrified. He had good reason to be. These were not people you wanted to mess with. I could see why he was so desperate for help, and I could also see why our parents had finally washed their hands of him. This was way beyond their usual bail-out territory. But me, I was not our parents. I was not going to bail him out financially, but I was going to use this situation to my advantage. I was going to make George pay. In more ways than one. I started to think about how I could use this situation to my revenge plan. I had him living under my roof, completely dependent on me. I had him scared and desperate. I had him willing to do anything I said. The power dynamic had completely shifted. For the first time in our lives, I was in control, and I was going to enjoy it. Over the next few weeks, I continued to make George work for me. I gave him increasingly difficult and unpleasant tasks. I made him run errands all over the city, sometimes in the pouring rain. I made him clean my apartment until it sparkled, and then I would find something else for him to clean. I was relentless, and he took it all. He never complained, never argued, never even looked at me the wrong way. He was like a shadow, always there, always obedient, always doing whatever I told him to do. It was intoxicating. To have that kind of power over George, after all these years of him being the favored one, the one who got everything he wanted. It was a complete reversal of our roles, and I was loving every minute of it. But I knew that just making him clean my apartment was not enough. That was not real revenge. I wanted something more. I wanted to make him suffer. I wanted to make him feel the way I had felt when he stole my college fund. Helpless, betrayed, and utterly defeated. So I started to escalate things. I started to be more demanding, more critical, more cruel. I would find fault with everything he did. If he cleaned the kitchen, I would complain that he had missed a spot. If he cooked dinner, I would say it was too salty or too bland. I would nitpick every little thing just to chip away at his self-esteem, to make him feel worthless and incompetent. And it was working. I could see it in his eyes, in his slumped shoulders, in his increasingly downcast demeanor. George, the once confident, charming golden child, was withering before my eyes. He was becoming a shell of his former self. And I was the one doing it to him. One evening, after a particularly long and grueling day of chores, George was sitting on the couch, looking exhausted and defeated. I was sitting across from him, watching him, enjoying his misery. Finally, I spoke. "You know, George," I said, "you are really pathetic." He looked up at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resentment. "Thanks," he mumbled. "I appreciate that." "No," I said, "I mean it. You are pathetic. You have no job, no money, no friends, no family who wants anything to do with you. You are a complete and utter failure." His face flushed red. "That is not true," he said, his voice rising slightly. "I have friends." "Well, I used to have friends, and Mom and Dad still care about me." "Deep down, oh please, George," I scoffed. "Your friends are probably just as pathetic as you are. And Mom and Dad, they are done with you. They told you themselves. They are not going to bail you out anymore. You are on your own. Completely and utterly alone." His eyes started to water. "Stop it, Jessica," he said, his voice trembling. "Just stop it." "Why should I stop?" I said, my voice cold and hard. "You stole my college fund, George. You ruined my future. You never apologized, never showed any remorse. You just smirked and said I would figure it out. Well, I did figure it out, but I never forgot. And now it is your turn to suffer. It is your turn to feel what it is like to be helpless and betrayed. It is your turn to pay the price." Tears were streaming down his face now. "I am sorry, Jessica," he sobbed. "I am so sorry. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. Please just forgive me." "Forgive you?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter laugh. "Forgive you? After everything you have done, after everything you have put me through, you think a simple apology is going to make up for that? You are even more pathetic than I thought." He buried his face in his hands, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched him for a few moments, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and something else. Something I could not quite identify. Maybe guilt. No, it could not be guilt. I had every right to do this. He deserved it. He deserved to suffer. But as I watched him cry, something inside me started to shift. The anger, the resentment, the burning desire for revenge, it started to dissipate. It was like a balloon slowly deflating. The satisfaction I had been feeling was fading, replaced by a hollow emptiness. I had gotten my revenge. I had broken George down, made him suffer, made him beg for forgiveness. And it felt pointless, empty. It did not make me feel better. It did not undo the past. It did not change anything. In fact, it made me feel worse. Watching George cry, seeing him so broken and defeated, it was not the triumphant victory I had imagined. It was just sad, pathetic, and a little bit disturbing. Was this really what I wanted? To become as cruel and heartless as George had always been selfish and entitled. I sighed, and the fight went out of me. The anger drained away, leaving me feeling tired and strangely deflated. "Okay, George," I said, my voice softer now. "Stop crying." He looked up at me, his face red and blotchy, his eyes swollen. "Really?" He sniffled. "Really stop?" "Yes," I said, "really stop. It is enough." He stared at me, confused. But I thought you wanted me to suffer." "I thought you wanted revenge." "I did," I said. "I did want revenge, but I do not anymore. It is not worth it. It is not making me happy. It is just making me tired, and you look even more tired." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. So what does this mean? Does this mean I can go?" "No," I said, "not yet. You still owe me money, a lot of money, and you still need to deal with those loan sharks. I am not letting you off the hook completely. But I am not going to be cruel to you anymore. I am done with that." He looked at me, a flicker of hope in his eyes. So what are you going to do?" "I am going to help you," I said. "I am going to help you get your life back on track, but not because I forgive you. And not because I suddenly love you or anything. But because I am tired of being angry, and because deep down you are still my brother, and I do not want to see you destroy yourself." He blinked and another tear rolled down his cheek. You are going to help me? Really?" "Yes," I said, "really, but it is going to be on my terms, and you are going to work hard, really hard. Are you in?" He nodded quickly, eagerly. "Yes," he said, "I am in. Anything, I will do anything." "Good," I said, "then get up. We have a lot of work to do." And so I started to help George. I helped him find a job, a real job, not some get-rich-quick scheme. It was a menial job, stocking shelves at a grocery store, but it was honest work. And it was a start. I helped him create a budget, to manage his money and start paying back his debts. I even helped him negotiate with the loan sharks to reduce the amount he owed and set up a payment plan. It was not easy. It was stressful and time-consuming, and there were times when I wanted to just give up and kick him out. But I did not. I stuck with it. And slowly, gradually, George started to change. He started to take responsibility for his actions. He started to work hard at his job, and he actually started to save money. He stopped making excuses, stopped blaming others, and started to take control of his own life. He was still George in many ways. He was still a bit lazy, a bit entitled, a bit clueless. But he was trying. He was actually trying. And that was more than I could have ever hoped for. It took a long time, months and months of hard work and setbacks and frustrations. But eventually, George paid off his debts. He got his life back on track. He even started to rebuild his relationship with our parents, who were cautiously optimistic about his progress. And me, I got something too. I got rid of my anger, my resentment, my need for revenge. I learned that forgiveness is not about condoning what someone did to you. It is about letting go of the bitterness and pain that is poisoning you from the inside out. It is about choosing to move on, to heal, to create a better future for yourself. George eventually moved out of my apartment, got his own place, and started to build his own independent life. We are not best friends by any means, but we are okay. We talk occasionally, we see each other at family gatherings, and we are civil to each other. And that is enough. For now, anyway. Looking back, I realized that my revenge plan, while initially satisfying, was ultimately pointless. It did not fix anything. It did not make me happy. It just made me more like the person I hated. True revenge is not about hurting someone else. It is about healing yourself. And that is what I finally did. I healed myself. And in the process, I may have even helped my brother heal too. And that, in the end, is a much better outcome than any revenge I could have ever imagined. What do you think, Reddit? Did I handle this situation the right way? Am I the a-hole for wanting revenge in the first place? Or am I justified in what I did? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated on more shocking real-life stories happening around you.